The death toll from flash flooding in Spain has risen to 155. This as the country begins 3 days of mourning. On Thursday, Spain's King Felipe warned that the emergency is not over yet. The eastern regions of Murcia and Valencia were hit the hardest. The region saw heavy rain after a cold drop triggered huge storms. Now, cold drops are when a cold Atlantic low-pressure system collides with warm Mediterranean air.
Rescue workers are scouring Valencia's flooded landscape, airlifting stranded residents to safety. Swathes of the area are completely submerged after a year's worth of rain fell in just a few hours. Marooned vehicles littering motorways and piled up in streets show the strength of what was Spain's worst natural disaster in a century. Efforts to clean up mud and debris from the storm are underway. Residents are questioning why they were not sufficiently warned of the incoming floodwater.
I haven't seen the police, nor the mayor, nor anyone else. No one has come here to show their face. This is unexpected because, truth be told, this is all unprecedented. They raised the alarm when the water was already here. When they told me the flood was coming, it was already too late.
They were telling me on the phone that the water was coming, and I said to myself, but it isn't raining. And when I looked out, there was already a metre of water here, and I got overwhelmed. I couldn't do anything. I said, I'm going downstairs to move the car, and I went downstairs and the water was already like this at the door.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez visited Valencia, where he warned residents that the situation is still uncertain.
I would like to tell the people who live in the province of Valencia and also in Castellón that the storm is continuing, so please stay at home. Do not go out. Stay at home and listen to all the warnings from the emergency services.
Locals are now advised to hunker down and wait for the next stage in what is an unprecedented natural catastrophe.
DW Correspondent Jan-Philip Scholz is in Valencia.
Very slowly, the entire picture of the disaster is emerging here in Valencia. This neighborhood still does not have any electricity, and the mobile network is down most of the time. Just 2 kilometers from here, there are villages that are still completely cut off from the outside world. This is one of the only streets that connects the affected areas with the city center of Valencia. So a lot of people come to bring water and food, or just to find out if their loved ones are still alive. Nobody knows at the moment how many people have died. At the moment, the numbers are already above 100, but most observers say that in the next hours and days, the numbers will probably increase.
For more now, I'm joined by Hanna Cloke. She's a professor of hydrology at the University of Reading in the UK. Professor, it's good to have you with us. I'd like to get your professional opinion. Do you think that the people in Spain, did they have adequate warning about this precipitation and the flooding, or do you suspect that people did not take that warning seriously?
I mean, it's an excellent question because so very many people have died. So we can see that something has gone wrong here. Certainly, there were forecasts out of heavy rainfall before this happened, and I could see that sitting in Reading, that something was going to happen in this region. And yet those warnings did not reach those people on the ground. We can hear people talking there that they didn't receive the warning in time, and there was already water there. And if we already knew the rain was going to fall, then definitely something has gone wrong.
And it sounds like this was a perfect storm. It sounds like you had people who maybe were not aware of what was about to happen, literally driving into the floodwaters. Is there anything that could have been done to save them or to protect them?
I mean, that's terrifying, isn't it? It's one of the worst things that you can do in a flood situation is drive in floodwater. And some of these people were clearly not aware of that risk. Some of them may not have believed it might happen. It's very difficult to imagine an unprecedented flood that sweeps vehicles off the road and turns them upside down. That's very difficult if it's never happened to you before to take that seriously. But there's definitely more that we need to do to prepare for this kind of flooding in the future. And I think the authorities will need to ask themselves some very clear questions about how they can do this better.
And what can we do? I mean, I understand that some people were saying that they received in the span of 4 to 8 hours as much rain as in an entire year. I mean, is that something that we should be preparing to see on a more regular basis moving forward?
Big floods like this have always happened. They don't happen very often, which is why we don't remember them. But we know that this area is at risk of these big flash floods, but this was an awful lot of rain. And it's certainly, we can see those fingerprints of climate change on these types of rainfall events and these floods. So we must be preparing for these types of events better.
This extreme weather condition, what's known as a cold drop, triggered these storms. As you say, these things have happened before. How do we know, though, that climate change is influencing the intensity of what we're seeing right now?
The physics tells us that as we warm our atmosphere and warm our oceans, that means more water can get drawn up into these storm clouds, which means more heavy rain will fall out. So those storms that might have happened anyway will have heavier rain associated with them. And we've seen a number of them this year as well across the world, where it looks like unprecedented rainfall.
Professor Hanna Cloke, Professor of Hydrology at the University of Reading in the UK, we appreciate your time and your analysis and insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
DW's chief climate reporter Louise Osborne joins me in the studio now. Louise, we've heard a so-called cold drop triggered those storms. That's hardly unusual. But how does climate change play into that scenario?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, climate change didn't cause the weather in the first place, but it made it worse. Scientists are saying that, because the region had been so hot over the summer, the Mediterranean was particularly hot. And so there was a lot of water that was evaporating from the Mediterranean into the atmosphere. The atmosphere is then generally hotter as well as a result of climate change and able to hold more water. So it's around 7% for every degree of global warming. So that means there was a lot more water in the atmosphere anyway, which translates then into a lot more water falling when there's this kind of event.
Now, what can communities do to prepare and reduce the impact?
I mean, I think it's clear that authorities need to reevaluate the kind of infrastructure and planning they have in place for, this level of water that we are seeing. I mean, these events are not going to happen all the time, but they need to be prepared for when it does. There's also so-called nature-based solutions that they can put in place. So this can be something from planting more trees, which are able to absorb water, or in some cases, like in Boston, where the authorities are redoing public parks so that they put in kind of meadows that are able to absorb water and also landscape features that can act as dams in the case of, sea level rise and things like that.
So the water has somewhere to go in case it pours down like that.
Exactly. And, in this case, one of the major issues was also the early warning systems in place. So there have been suggestions that, we should be taking these events as seriously as we would earthquakes and tsunamis, for example, and maybe even having drills to know how to cope or what action to take in such a case.
Spain has seen devastating droughts over the past year. I was there actually in the summer, and we had 46 degrees. It was incredibly hot. And are we likely to see these extreme weather events getting worse?
Scientists say yes. And, these events also feed into each other. I mean, the droughts that we've seen make the earth harder, for example, which means when there is heavy rainfall, then it's more likely to flood.
Because it cannot drain into the ground, it sort of just flows off
Exactly, it causes kind of rivers of water instead. The World Weather Attribution, which is a group of scientists that analyses the connection between climate change and weather, has said that, you know, the last 10 most deadliest extreme weather events were influenced by climate change. So we're talking about flooding or heavy rain leading to flooding, droughts, heat waves, all of these kinds of things that we are going to see as the temperature continues to rise, that will get worse if we don't stop emitting carbon dioxide and preventing the temperature from rising.
And sometimes some people say it's too late to do that.
Well, there's argumentation also within the scientific community about this. You know, there are reports still saying that we could stay under the 1.5 degree temperature limit that was put in place by governments to try to stay under. But, you know, we are getting closer to that. We've already seen years where the average temperature has been 1.5 degrees.
It was above ever so slightly, yeah?
Exactly. Yeah. We're still not at a place where, you know, the average global temperature is always above 1.5, but if action isn't taken, we could quickly get there.
And we're getting an impression of what it might look like if we cross that threshold. Thank you very much. Louise Osborne, DW's chief climate reporter.